Hello, welcome back. I'm Jeff Byers, instructor for ANI 150, and we're in module 4 now, and we are going to UV map our sci-fi weapon. So what we have to do is we have to open up our scene, the low poly. Let's go ahead and do that first. Okay, and we see that we've got our low poly weapon. Let's go ahead and turn on wireframe on shaded. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and import, we're going to import our high poly weapon. Okay, there we go. And they should be occupying the same space. Okay, so let's go ahead and put these in layers. This is really important. So here's my low poly, so let's go ahead and add a layer. And let's add that to a layer. So that's just going to be called this low poly. Okay. And let's go ahead and turn that off. And then we've got our high poly. It's really not a high poly yet, but it will be. And let's add a layer and let's call this high poly. It's really important that they're occupying the exact same space. Okay? Alright. Let's save that. Alright, so we turn them both off, they both disappear. Just make sure everything's good. Alright, so it's really important that if we do scale these up, and we should, to feet now, the reason why we want to do that, I love modeling in centimeters and as a default, because when we scale things up, we tend to have some preview issues, and I like modeling in centimeters. That's just my preference. You can model in feet if you'd like. Okay, that's up to you. All right. So let's go ahead and have both of those turned on. Okay. The first thing I'm going to do is we're just going to select both of them. We're going to delete by type history. Okay. We want to center pivot both of those, delete by type history, and freeze transformations. And then we want to scale them both together. Okay. But we can't do that until we set something up in the preferences folder. Now you can see that I went down here, clicked on this little guy running away from looks like a gear, and we're going to go into settings, and we're going to change the working units from centimeter to foot. Okay, and go ahead and save. Alright, so now we're working in feet. There's a couple reasons why I do this. Okay, so if we actually scale the model up into feet, it'll be in a realistic scale. Okay, right now it's unrealistic. Okay, so let's go in here, and this will help with rendering too, with the lighting. Okay, let's say each cube equals a foot. So how long is this model? Okay, let's just say it's about a foot. It's a foot wide. So let's kind of put your hands out or get a ruler and look at what a foot is. Okay. So yeah, that's realistic. A little bit larger. Okay. So if one unit is this, right, and I scale it up just a little bit more, so it's a little bit bigger. Okay. That would be realistic. Okay. So let's go ahead and get that centered. I'm going to hit the grid and just kind of snap it back into that center. Okay, this is our scale. Okay, all right, so that's realistic. All right, so maps will bake better, your lighting will look better, your rendering will look better, and that's the key. Okay, so let's get it to realistic scale. Now we're ready to texture. So what I want to do is that we've got some translate issues right here. Okay, I've got it centered exactly how it should be centered, right? All right. So now we're going to click off and select both of them and go to center pivot, delete by type history, and freeze transformations. Now they're both set. Now I'm going to turn off both of them and just work on the low poly now. I don't have to worry about the high poly. Everything is scaled. We're now set up to start texturing. Right, the next thing we're going to do is just basically follow the same exact things we did with the object we had before with the crate, the sci-fi crate. You could actually watch that and lay out UVs. I think you're very comfortable with laying out UVs now. Maybe not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take you through the UV mapping. This is just getting everything set up. So I don't like everything together. Everything as combined is not good. I don't like doing it that way. So I'm going to uncombine everything. So I'm going to separate. So I can do it here. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and go to separate. So go to mesh and then separate. Okay. So this will separate all the pieces the way I modeled it. Okay. And this is exactly how I want to UV map this object. Okay. We'll eventually put the object back together again. We're also going to use the UDIM tiling technique. Okay. So now we're all set up. So what I want you to do is go ahead and save this file. Save scene as. Okay. Let me get you set up. Before we do that, let's do one more thing. Okay. Let's go ahead and select all of these pieces, and let's make sure they're in Add Selected Objects. Okay. Let's go ahead and turn that off. Okay. So that is working. All right. So what do we need to do with the high poly? Well, we can do two things. We can add more detail and add, model rivets in here. We could model screw heads in here if we wanted to and add those on there. And then we need to, go ahead and smooth it and send it out as a high poly. And then there's another way we could go. We could go just like what we did with the sci-fi crate, where we bring it into ZBrush and continue to detail it with rivets and using alpha maps and all that stuff. Or we could go into Substance Painter and go ahead and just use it as is and add rivets and stuff on top of the low poly. There's several ways we can actually continue adding detail. Okay, what's more efficient? Probably Substance Painter. Is it as accurate? Probably not. The most accurate way would be continuing and actually modeling rivets into just adding rivets and stuff like that into the high poly. Like we could continue modeling and doing that and adding those details. Okay, so I prefer, is it the easy way or the hard way? We've already gone this far. So what I'm going to do is show you different ways to add rivets in the next video if you want to go that route. But in this video here, I'm going to stick with prep work for Substance Painter. So for the high poly model. So all we have to do with this model then at that point is if we're happy with everything, then what we want to do is we want to go ahead and smooth it. Okay, that's where we're at with this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go Control D with this object, create another object. Okay, and I'm just going to call it high poly mud box. Okay. All right. Let's just call that high poly mud box. All right. There we go. Let's turn that off, and we're back into just going in here and setting everything up for Substance Painter. So I'm going to hold down spacebar, go to mesh, and go to smooth. And we're going to triangulate, or we're going to go ahead and smooth it at 2. All right. Alright, so that gives us a very high resolution mesh. Okay? Alright, so that mesh is very high res, and we've got some nice corners and edge loops in here. And let's go in here and go click off of wireframe. There we go. And you can see those nice little edges right there. Okay? Now those will translate over very well when we actually go in and try to bake the normal map. Okay, this normal map creating a normal map will create all these beautiful little edges, and you'll see all those. And you're thinking to yourself, well, the only thing we're really baking is this information here that we see. Okay. That's not really true, because you're baking all this information here that you see with these edges. Okay. Alright. Cool. Onto the low poly. So that's really not true when you're thinking, what are we actually baking? Well, that's what you're baking. Okay. So that's what's important. That's what we're getting, all those beautiful soft edges here, especially this edge right here that you see, and that nice edge right here that you see. Okay. Normally you will not see that in the bake. Okay. Now you may have some issues like baking in holes. Holes are horrible to bake. They're extremely difficult, and you have to watch for that. Okay, the baking process for that is pretty horrible, and you will see that you might have to use a cage, which we might, we'll discuss that. How to use a cage, right? So we'll discuss how to use cages and stuff like that. Alright, so anyway, that's the prep work. So you got your high poly and you got your low poly. Okay. And normally your high poly needs to be smaller than the low poly, but they're so close together. I'm not going to spend the time. If we have some issues with it, we might have to look at that. But basically, that's why I used a low poly. I started with low poly, added edge loops. So now when we get to the baking process, they're pretty much over top of each other. So anyway, that's why I do what I do. Okay, that's why I do that, because it's a little easier than to bake the normal map. So that's really important. All right, so we got all that done. The high poly and low poly is now finished. Okay, we got that separated, so now we can go into UV mapping. Okay, we got it scaled. Everything's all prepped up and ready to go. All right, so next video will be UV mapping.